Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Watching the Watchers. My name is Robert GRULER. I am a lawyer, criminal defense lawyer here in Scottsdale, Arizona. And what we do is we help good people charged with crimes. I also am the host of a show where we monitor police misconduct, prosecutorial misconduct, judicial misconduct. So I spend a lot of time living in the criminal legal space. We are constantly trying to increase some transparency, spread some light on what is really happening in our judicial system and both inside and outside. And today we're joined by a friend of mine, an amazing guy, another lawyer locally here in Arizona. His name is Scott Griffiths. And Scott is a lawyer who kind of works in this space, but not really. He does predominantly personal injury law with a side helping of civil rights. So when people come through the criminal justice system, a lot of what happens that we deal with is happening in criminal court. We study criminal law, criminal issues, criminal trials. But there are a lot of other things that are happening in the civil components, in the civil side of the law. And a lot of the times this can impact people charged with crimes. It can impact people who are not being charged with crimes. But a lot of it has to do with holding law enforcement accountable on the civil side of things. And so we're excited to have Scott here today to talk about some of those issues. So Scott, tell us a little bit about yourself. So you're from Arizona. You spent a lot of time here. Can you kind of just give us some background?
Sure. First of all, thanks, Rob, for having me on your show. I've enjoyed watching the Bad Popo segments and Watching the Watchers. I think those are great names, and
Appreciate
and
that.
I like what you guys are doing. So, my name is Scott Griffiths. I'm an attorney here in Phoenix. I'm a native of Arizona and of the Phoenix area. I attended Arizona State for my undergraduate degree, and then I ended up at Phoenix School of Law for my law school. But in between, I was a teacher. I owned a couple of businesses, and then, as I finished up law school, ended up being in law, primarily focused on personal injury, like you said, the regular run-of-the-mill car accidents and wrongful deaths. But I really have a passion for working with folks who have had their civil rights violated by law enforcement, by the government, and that even includes inmates in prisons, folks that do not have access to adequate health care, the private medical facilities that they use, or the private medical contractors work on a for-profit basis. And so a lot of violations there. And so I really do try to help out that underserved population.
Yeah, and that's obviously something we've been covering a lot on the show. This idea that just because they're in jail or in prison doesn't mean that they lose all of their rights, that they lose all their access to certain care, medical care, certain human rights and things like that are fundamental, and those don't go away. And so there are times where law enforcement, in doing law enforcement's job, they will overstep those lines, and the only recourse really is to address that in civil law. Is that a fair summation?
That's a pretty fair summation. Yeah. I mean, there might be some other ways to get some sort of a justice, for someone whose rights are violated. I think of someone who maybe, gets really beaten up by the police for a very simple arrest or something. What's going to happen? Well, once the criminal case is disposed of, then it can be assessed on the civil end and see if there's something that can be done for the officers or to the officers or to the department, whether it's going to be a financial compensation or just making sure that the department is now following the regulations and following what the laws, the Constitution requires them to do.
Yeah, when we talk about a lot of these things like constitutional rights and civil rights, and people are seeing a lot of the terms thrown around like qualified immunity and immunity against prosecution and all these different things. It seems sort of abstract. It's hard to understand what a lot of that means if you're not a lawyer. You and I spent years studying these things, and even with that education and with years of practice, sometimes it's still tricky, right? That's why they call it practicing law. You're always learning and things are changing, and so you always have to adapt. You were telling me before we hopped on about a story that sort of helped flesh some of this out, or maybe a good example. Is that something you can talk about?
Sure. In fact, we got a couple of different cases, and so really, you mentioned qualified immunity. Qualified immunity is the idea that a police officer, I mean, they got a tough job. I think everybody can kind of agree that it's a challenging job, and so police officers, when they start doing their job, have to make decisions. And so, qualified immunity is a defense that the police officers or the government officials can use that will stop them from being prosecuted, stop them from being challenged in court, stop a lawsuit. And the way that a police officer can invoke that is by saying basically that there is a clearly established law, or that the right is clearly established, or I'm sorry, uh, you can charge somebody, hey, look, the police officer, there's a clearly established law, and the facts are that you didn't know, that you knew that you violated it. And so if a police officer does violate the rules, they know that they're violating rules and there's a constitutional protection, then they're not entitled to qualified immunity. And we deal with these cases very regularly in terms of police officers who are doing searches, police officers who are making arrests. And then there's one case in particular that we've been working on. We had it up in the Ninth Circuit. It's been remanded back. It's local in Pinal County, and it has to do with a guy that has a house down in Casa Grande. And his name is Jim. I'll just call him Jim for the purpose of our discussion today. And I mean, you want me to talk a little bit more about the facts of it?
Yeah, if you're comfortable doing that, and that's okay, because I think, like I said, people can hear these terms, but until they like see what you're talking about and what happened, then I think it'll make a little bit more sense once they know.
Sure. So let's start with Jim. Jim's just a regular guy like everybody. He's maybe a little bit older, but he's just at his house one morning. The police respond to a telephone or to a call for service down the road, like several blocks away, and they start chasing somebody who has a felony arrest warrant. Now, the bad guy makes it to Jim's house and runs inside of Jim's house. Okay, Jim's just there. So when the police show up, they surround the house right away. And then they start, talking to Jim as he comes out. And they were like, hey, that guy went into your house. Do we, have permission to go in there? And Jim gives him consent to go in to make an arrest, and then also hands him the keys to the house and to his cars. And so, from there, the officers now, they want to start talking about, do they have consent to get into the house? What are they going to do? And so over the course of time, what ends up happening with Jim in his case is over the course of hours is the police try to call into him, the bad guy. They try to get him to come out, but there's no answer, right? They've surrounded the house. They don't see anybody coming in or out of the house, but they don't get any kind of reactions from inside of the house. So eventually they call the SWAT team. A couple hours later, SWAT shows up. SWAT sets up a perimeter around the house. And then they begin to use a whole bunch of aggressive tactics to be able to try to flush this guy out of the house. They start with a battering ram. And it's like almost a tractor with like a front end to kind of push down the door and push down the walls of Jim's house. They break out some windows, and that doesn't seem to get any effect, right? Then they throw in a tactical telephone so they can get on the phone with this guy and talk to him and bring him out. No answer to the tactical telephone. They make a lot of phone calls. The entire time they're yelling at him on the bullhorn, come out, come out. And he doesn't. Eventually, they throw a robot in. They have like a mechanical robot on that SWAT team. And so the robot clears most of the house, and it's got a camera so they can see the house is clear and the person's not in any of these rooms. And so eventually the SWAT team gets tired of dealing with this. So they go ahead and fire up, start using OC spray and tear gas to be able to try to get this guy out. And so they begin shooting canisters. Up to 20 canisters are used in this 1,300 square foot home. And so they use some, I guess they use a weapon to blast this, cartridge into the house, and they have to go through all the windows and through the hole that the Bearcat made. Then there's still no reaction from anybody on the inside. So they eventually make a decision that they're going to use some flashbang grenades. They throw a bunch of those. I think they threw 2 of those into the house beginning. No reaction. And then finally they say, we got to breach the house. They fire a bunch more in as they enter the house. And of course, when they get in the house, they ransack the place. They tear things up. They punch holes in the television. There's holes in the walls, where nobody can hide. The house is torn up. And so he loses a significant amount, in fact, everything of his personal property, because it's destroyed, for its usefulness. And then it's also totally covered in this pepper spray or the tear gas. And I mean, no one can live in that house.
Right.
And so, he retains us to be able to kind of work with him to try to recover something against the city, because the city doesn't have any kind of compensation for him. They just go, there you go, thank you, and they just leave. The end of the story, of course, is that the guy's not even in the house. Right?
Yeah, I was going to ask. I was waiting for that. Yeah, and I was going to let you deliver it. But yeah, it's all that for nothing. Yeah.
yeah. They went through hours of putting the house under siege, just to find out that the guy really was laying out on the carport, like on the floor. No one really did a big search of the outside of the house first. So he was just laying there. I think he was either covered or partially covered with a tarp. But in any event, the perimeter failed, right? No one was fully watching, and the guy came out the back door, I guess, and hid. So they destroyed this guy's house, and so we're working with them. So we file our lawsuit against the county and the city and all the officers, and so we're seeking to be able to kind of level the playing field for him in terms of making something right. All of his earthly possessions have been destroyed. And his house, which he lived in, his family's passed on. And they've had it since the 1920s, and it's been generationally passed on. And he intended to do the same with his kids too. So,
yeah, I mean, what a bad day for that guy, right? He's trying to do the right thing. Somebody pops into his house, and Jim, hands the keys over, and he's expecting that law enforcement is going to kind of uphold their end of this social agreement that's happening. Yeah, I'm going to give you access to this. I know you guys have a job to do. You need to go get this guy out of my house and put him under arrest and all that. But you would expect that law enforcement would, or that our city or our, whatever, the county or whoever's responsible for that, whatever agency was responsible for going in there, would compensate him for the damage that they caused. This is part of, I guess, the cost of doing business, but he shouldn't be stuck with the bill. Why is that? Why does that happen? Why is he, why would he not have recourse but for working with you and your team?
Well, I mean, now in his case, we filed in federal court to try to get that kind of compensation or some sort of recourse for him financially to help him recover. There's a lot of moving parts here, but in the end, the defense that the officers used and that the county's using is qualified immunity. That they're saying that, that there isn't any kind of controlling law that says what they did was wrong, and that an officer in the position that those officers were in would know what they were doing violated his rights. Right? We know we have a right we have a right against unlawful searches, unreasonable seizures, or unreasonable searches and lawful seizures. But in this case, the officers are saying, hey, look, this guy was in the house. He was a felon. He was in flight. He may or may not have had a gun. There may or may not have been guns in the house. And to our knowledge, he was barricaded in. And qualified immunity is a defense that's been thrown up. Now, the court hasn't decided on qualified immunity here. So that's why I can't go very much further in terms of how this case ended up. Because, where they've defended on qualified immunity, they basically have also said, we've had some problems in how we pled it. We didn't adequately plead. So that's where we've been with the Ninth Circuit. It's now been remanded back down for us to be able to address with the district court the issues of qualified immunity. But as I was telling you a little bit before, Robert, there's a case that was happening while we were, filing this lawsuit and working on this lawsuit. There was a very similar case, and it has been decided completely by the Ninth Circuit. And so it's from Idaho, also in the Ninth Circuit Court, right? And so a very similar type of thing. There's a report of somebody who's a felon, got felony arrest warrants. I think the story goes like this. Grandma calls the police and says, this felon is in my house. It's my daughter's boyfriend. He's in the house and we don't want him here. And he's dangerous. He has a gun or a BB gun, and the kids are around, and he's high on methamphetamines. That's what they say. Mm-hmm. And so the police respond, right? Who wouldn't respond? And they show up. the grandma also says, hey, look, or the mother says, hey, my daughter's going to deny he's here, right? She's not going to tell you the truth. So when they're waiting outside, the police are got the house surrounded. They're calling into the house. No one's coming out. Daughter's walking down the road. This is the plaintiff in our case. She's walking down the road, and they come to her and they say, hey, look, if you're harboring a felon, you can get in trouble. Those were the words they used, okay? And this is kind of factually important that they told her, you could get in trouble, right? And then she said, well, look, he may or may not be in the house. I don't know. The cops kind of huddle up, which is something I always find to be interesting, right? They kind of huddle up because they got to get something going, figure out the right plan.
What's the play? Yeah.
Yeah.
Who's calling the play and how are we going to execute it? Yeah.
Yeah. So after a few minutes, a police officer comes back and he's like, well, look, can we go in your house and get it? And she's like, yeah. And she hands over the key, right? Just like Jim did.
Yeah.
And then she calls for a ride and she leaves. It's a little different. Jim watched his house get destroyed.
Sure.
Whereas this lady didn't. So she takes off. Well, they call the SWAT team. The SWAT team sets up a perimeter. The SWAT team then decides to use OC spray and everything else that they have to use to blow holes in this house and try to get this guy out of the house. And ultimately, just like in Jim's case, this guy's not in the house, but they've destroyed the house to the point that that she can't stay in it. Like no one can stay there. It smells so bad. Everybody's crying and choking from it. And
Right.
The house is uninhabitable. And so she sued also. And so what she said basically was, number one, I did not give consent, right? I was under coercion or duress because the cop was threatening me with getting in trouble if I was
Right.
harboring a fugitive. Right? So the court said, hey, look, under qualified immunity, this officer didn't know based on the whole timing of things. He, number one, didn't threaten you with arrest. And then number two, there was a time between when he kind of said those words and when you said yes. And he asked you, can I go in? And you said yes. So they gave the officer qualified immunity for the consent portion of the search. Okay. Then the next question is, did they exceed the scope of, what they're allowed to do? And, she had only given permission, assuming she did give consent, she consented only to them going in to arrest him. Right. And so that's a good question for the police officers. And the Ninth Circuit gave qualified immunity to the police officers saying, hey, look, he was a dangerous guy, methamphetamines, maybe had some guns. We don't know. There were no kids in the house or anything. But ultimately, they give qualified immunity to the officers for making that decision. And then factually, was it an excessive thing for blowing holes in the walls and using that much tear gas? And the cops were like, or the court was, no, they get qualified immunity for that decision too, saying that there's no court cases from the Supreme Court or in the Ninth Circuit that says what is excessive tear gas, what is excessive concussion grenades.
So what is is there any remedy for her? I mean, does the Ninth Circuit just sends it back down and says they're immune for what they did?
That's essentially what the Ninth Circuit did, saying qualified immunity is offered, so it's going to be remanded to be dismissed. And so that case actually is being petitioned to the Supreme Court. There's I think a classmate of ours is related to the attorney representing that family in that case. And so there's a writ that's been given to the Supreme Court. Hopefully one of the justices is intrigued by this and will allow that case to be heard, because that could really open up in the Ninth Circuit, or at the Supreme Court level, what is going to be allowed as in terms of excessive. Are they going to define what's excessive?
Yeah, and it's a very interesting issue. It's surprising to me. Obviously, I don't spend a lot of time in it, but I hear a lot about it, about forfeiture and about the government kind of taking things from people. And that's what people don't understand. It's like, if they come in and destroy your home, that is like a taking of a property, and that's a legal term, like a taking. Of sort of it was yours and now it's ours. Your home's destroyed, so the value of that has been like literally stripped away from you by the government. And when the government does something like that, traditionally, when we're talking about things like eminent domain, where they come in and take your house, they pay you for that. They give you just compensation for that taking. And it just sounds like that's not happening at all in these cases.
Right. And a difference, I mean, and of course, every case is factually different. So you kind of have to take the high level stuff the courts, give us in one case and then apply it to the different case. The case in Idaho, they didn't use 20 canisters of gas. I think it basically just implied they used 1 or 2 canisters of gas. And so that might be in Idaho, and in the Ninth Circuit, that might be something that's, considered to be reasonable, at least something to the point that a cop wouldn't know it's excessive. And so, assuming that in Jim's case that we're moving forward in this case, we're going to certainly draw the distinction of, 2 canisters of gas versus 20 canisters of gas plus 4 for the flashbang grenades, plus using a Bearcat, plus using a robot. What is going to be excessive and unreasonable in searching?
Yeah, yeah. Versus, you should have looked under the car or under the tarp over there, rather than blowing a house down. I get the sense that a lot of these guys kind of enjoy the excitement of this process. We see it in some of our cases where law enforcement they'll pull over, an 18-year-old girl who's driving on the interstate, and they'll say, it smells like marijuana in here. And then they'll pull her out of the car and they just take knives and they start, slicing through upholstery and ripping panels out of the car and pulling seats out. Oh, we didn't find any marijuana, but you were speeding, so we're going to give you a speeding ticket. And then that girl's just on her way, right? She's got to go deal with the insurance companies or whatever. In a case like that, that's not going to be fruitful for a lawyer to take on a contingency basis, or really, she's not going to go hire an attorney to go, spend a bunch of money filing civil claims against these guys. So she's just SOL in those types of situations.
Right.
What about in your situation, right? So this has been remanded. Obviously, this person has an attorney. You've taken some interest in this case. Obviously, they've got a lot of financial interest in this case, and so you're working that out in terms of mustering up the resources to take this to the Supreme Court, which is a appeal to the Ninth Circuit. Many people don't have the resources or the kind of the tenacity to do that. For those people, is there any recourse right now? I mean, do they just live with this? If this gal that you just described from Idaho, or Jim, for example, if they just say, okay, I guess we lost that, and now their house is destroyed, is there anything else they can do, or do they just have to live with that?
Well, I think that's a great question, because I don't like the answer where you say, I'm sorry, there really is no other recourse. You can't do much else. Until the question is decided at the Supreme Court level, as there are still options. And so, from a business perspective, we deal with these cases, especially with inmate cases. We have to make decisions as to what's going to make the most sense, looking at the law, looking at the rest of the other circuits, right? The Ninth Circuit is just one circuit. And so you have to look at what the Supreme Court says, look to what the other circuits are saying, seeing if there's a split in those decisions. There is some split in some of the qualified immunity decisions and what is excessive and what needs to be contemplated in excessive force. And I think that in the Idaho case, that's what the attorneys are really going for in their writ. It says, hey, look, there are circuit splits. I haven't had to go that far in it to my own research yet, but their writ to the Supreme Court says, hey, look, this is an important issue because this is happening to regular people. Now, in both circumstances, I would also, if I was counseling these people, I would say, hey, look, do you have homeowners insurance or renters insurance that can help compensate and get you back on your feet, right? And do those policies, are they comprehensive enough so that they cover what's happened to you, right? And so I don't have any idea about the situation in Idaho. I do know that in Mr. Denby's case, there was an insurance policy, and that's a totally different issue, and which I won't really speak to about, but today. But the idea is that you kind of protect yourself there. Jim is a regular guy, but a lot of our clients, Robert, and this because you deal with the criminal world. A lot of your clients are regular folks. Bad things happen to them, right? Make a mistake or in the wrong place, wrong time. Other clients you have are kind of, they're serial, they're the repeat customers, right? They come because their life is a certain way. And so I don't know anything about what happened in Miss West's case. That's the case from Idaho. I don't know her situation, but if there's, maybe she's living in an apartment or a hotel, there could be different insurance to cover that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious as to sort of the public policy behind, whether you can speak to this or not is unknown to me, but the policy, why do police departments and counties and governments operate that way? Is it just a financial thing? Is it, they just don't want to pay for the damage that they caused? Or is it, do you think more concern that if they pay for one of these things, then that's going to open them up to a floodgate of litigation? Any thoughts on why they're doing it this way?
Yeah, I tend to think it's the latter of what you said. I think it's like if you open the door to it. Also, there is going to be the potential for people to make fraudulent claims, right? In a totally unrelated matter, I've got some situations where insurance companies look at a case that I send a demand letter in, let's say, and they're like, "This is totally fake," and I don't take those types of clients. I have hard evidence when I do cases like this, but insurance companies don't want to pay.
Yeah.
And counties don't want to pay, and taxpayers certainly don't want to pay every single time something happens. And the other thing that happens, and this is really the unfair part, which is why I recommend everybody to at least have an attorney look at it, their situation, is because there are a number of hurdles to jump through or jump over, I guess, to clear before you can file a lawsuit against any public agency or public officer. If you're going to file a lawsuit, for instance, alleging negligence, a state law claim, you have a notice of claim. You have to 180 days from those events. You have to put them on notice. You're going to sue them. Now, if you're just doing a civil rights claim, you don't have the 180 days, but you still have 2 years to do that. And so,
which means just to hammer that point home for anybody that's listening, right? If they're watching this video and thinking about a claim, they've got that, you have to file, right, that notice of claim, the negligent claim against Arizona officials or the government, the police agency, anybody. You got to file that claim within that 6 months, or else you lose the right to do that, to pursue that any further. Is that right?
That's right. I'm going to just clarify one thing before. It's 180 days, and I've actually had the 6 months versus 180 computed out, and there's actually a difference in that. And if you don't comply with the 180-day deadline, you are out of luck. Courts will not give you a break. Now, there are exceptions if you're a minor, right? There are exceptions if you have some sort of mental incapacity and you can prove it. But other than that, there's really not a lot of times where you can get past 180 days. So anytime someone's rights are violated by the police, if you think excessive force in an arrest, if you think that they broke through your door when they shouldn't have, there's all these different types of times you think your rights are violated. It's time to get the copy of the police report, get those videos from the chest cameras or from the dashboards of the cars, and let's evaluate that, and then we can put them on notice.
Right. And you can put them on notice and then decide that you don't want to pursue it any further. Right. So you could say, yeah, we're filing our notice. We need to do additional investigations, and we just, this claim is probably not going to go anywhere. So you could at least kind of put the stake in the ground so that you're safe.
Yeah. You're going to protect your rights for that. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I don't know why they respond the way that they do. It seems very counterproductive to me. I understand them not wanting to open the door for, a bunch of frivolous lawsuits or claims from people. I get that. But at the same time, there's seems to me there's this growing kind of sentiment against law enforcement that's kind of bubbling up in our country a little bit about, they're seeing moms getting arrested at parks. They're seeing people getting dragged out of their businesses for staying open right now. And there's, we're seeing this Amari case going on, and
right.
people are getting really incensed about what law enforcement is doing. I can't tell you how many people we speak with who call the cops because they're in an argument with their significant other. Girlfriend calls the cops on the boyfriend, thinks they're going to come and they're going to break up the shouting match. They both get arrested, and they come to our office the next day, and they're like, I have no idea what happened. I just thought I was going to call the cops and they were going to come talk me through the situation or break it up. Little did I know, we're both being arrested. They searched the house. Now we're being charged with this and that and all these other things. And so I talk to a lot more people who call and say, I will never call the cops again. I will never do anything with the cops again than I do ever hearing anybody say, that was a really great experience. I'm really glad they came over and helped us through that. So when the cops show up and they destroy somebody's home and then they just leave and they say, good luck to you, it's still a taking in my book, whether you've got insurance or not to pay for it. You're paying for that insurance. You gotta go, secure the policy. What if you don't have a policy? You're just SOL. So the government, coming in and just, ransacking the place, it's not a good look for law enforcement. I don't think it serves them very well.
I think you're right. Well, I definitely agree with you on that part. It doesn't serve them well. It doesn't look good. But that 180-day deadline, or the notice of claim deadline that you have, it doesn't have to be done on the 180 days. You can do it earlier, and that gives the municipalities or the county or state or whoever the ability to assess that risk of litigation, do an investigation, find out what happened, and then make an offer. In the case in Idaho, the police there recognized something was not right. I think the woman, the plaintiff in that case, she had children, and they were searching for the child's dad. That's who was in the house when they were trying to get him. So the cops knew that she had a child, and they ended up putting her at a hotel for a couple of months, and then they gave her like $900 towards her possessions that were ruined from this pepper spray. So I think each municipality handles it different. I think here, I don't know Idaho politics versus Arizona politics, but it would seem to me like a lot of tough talkers here in Arizona will say, well, look, we didn't do anything wrong, prove it to us. And then when you do file the notice of claim, I have seen situations where the risk adjusters will call and talk to the person who lodged the claim and make an offer to settle. Usually it's pretty inadequate, right?
Yeah.
But it's something. And
Right.
and then after that, they'll assess their risk for litigation later.
Yeah. And that makes, I understand their perspective, and I understand the need to protect themselves from, certain levels of liability. But there are cases that in my mind are just so egregious, like the two that you described here, that, the house is gone. My very close friend, had his house burned down, and it didn't burn all the way down to the ground, but it, just the initial fire on the roof, it destroyed everything, every single piece of property, every carpet fiber, everything. So they had to basically knock the whole house down. It's kind of similar to what you're saying. When they fire this stuff in, they're blowing up flashbang grenades. Everything's been, basically poisoned with these chemicals. And so it really is like the whole house is gone. $900 to replace some personal property is nothing, So I love what you're doing. But I wanted to talk a little bit about, since we're, kind of smack dab in the middle of this coronavirus stuff, the idea, about these claims that medical or that people in custody in prisons and jails can be making. Can you tell us sort of about that area of law where you work with some of these people or some of those claims?
Sure. I mean, and not even specific to coronavirus right away. So, as if you're in the custody of the county, like you're a pretrial detainee, or even if you've been sentenced and you're still at the county, for a sentence less than a year, then, you have a constitutional right under the 8th Amendment and also the 14th Amendment to have adequate level of health care. And so when you're in prison, that's the same thing as well. And so they've created a situation or a structure of medical care in prison, where, especially in Arizona prisons, maybe I'll just focus on that right away. The prisons,
Sure.
the Department of Correction, most of the prisons have private healthcare providers. So they contract with a third-party company to provide care. Now, those are usually publicly traded companies. And so, they have a profit motive and a profit incentive to ensure that, they're going to make money, and their shareholders are all happy, but they still have to provide a constitutional level of care. And so there's a structure at each prison where an inmate would go to, turn in paperwork, have a nurse review the paperwork, triage their situation, and then, make decisions. Someone at the jail or the prison will make a decision as to what is the adequate level of care to provide. Then that decision, this is all happening over different days. If an inmate, say on Monday turns in his paperwork, it may not be seen until Monday night, Tuesday, possibly even Wednesday. Then it's triaged. Then they get scheduled to see a doctor maybe. Let's say it's someone who thinks they got a broken bone, right? they may be playing basketball, they fall, they break their elbow, can't move their elbow at all. They go to, fill out the paperwork, and it's still going to be days before they're seen by a doctor. They might get x-rayed in a couple of days, but then it's a while before they're seen by a doctor. Then to take it out further, what do you do then? Is the doctor going to be able to splint the arm? Do you have to go to the ER to get that done by an orthopedist or by a surgeon there?
Right.
And those are all delayed cases, all delayed treatment. So that's where my practice comes in, when inmates have a serious medical condition, a serious medical need, and they go through the proper channels and they're not getting speedy treatment. Broken bones I use as an example, Robert, because it's really one that the department fails at. They have x-ray machines at most of the facilities, but those x-ray technicians and stuff, they go home like at 5 p.m., sometimes earlier, right? And so, or they might not be there that day because they call out. And so then the inmates have to wait to be x-rayed. Then the x-rays have to be reviewed. Then they have to make a plan to take the inmate from the prison to some other provider, and they have to get it done with the prison guards. They have to get the van ready, get a couple guards. It's just a process. And so what often happens is an inmate won't get to an ER or to a medical provider to fix the bone for several days or even weeks. And by then, if the bone is if it's a closed break, it means the bones are kind of back where they should be. It's not separated. And so the bones have been healing. And so it's almost impossible then to make the fine adjustments you need to make to get the bone back in place for, non-painful walking or ambulation. So that's my practice area.
Yeah. And I got to imagine that you're busy with those. I've been to jails, I've been to prisons, I've been to federal prisons. I've seen the conditions in these places, and they are not good. They're not good at all. So
Right.
it's difficult for me to imagine that they're getting any kind of proactive medical care. It seems very reactive, like they're just, this happens and they deal with it. We've been seeing a lot of this stuff with the coronavirus. A lot of people on a lot of journalists and people have been just beating the doors down at the Bureau of Prisons and all over the place, all over the country, trying to make sure that the people who are in custody are getting adequate care, adequate treatment. Because we all know that they're not. They're not. I know they're not. But nobody wants to talk about it because it's sort of the forgotten segment of society. You think, well, because they're in custody, they don't deserve it. They're criminals. They're bad people. They don't deserve any of that stuff. And so we just kind of focus on people outside, which I think is extremely unfortunate.
Well, in going to coronavirus specific, so I wanted to let you like what I do for my practice. And coronavirus is one of these. It's a pandemic, right? It's a virus that gets transmitted, through respiration, and if you touch something, and the germs can be there, or the virus can be there and infect you later, and it has very long incubation period. And the prisons, most of the prisons in Arizona are dormitory style prisons.
Yeah.
And so that means you've got, 60 guys living in a barracks type of thing. And so there's no way that you can really socially distance anyone. Like that's, and so, even if you have cells, right, even if you're like in a more max custody or a closed custody facility, you're still, you might have an inmate that lives in the cell with you or not, but you're still going to be very condensed, and the air is recirculated, right? And there's really, I'll just tell you, there's not really any kind of they don't have hand sanitizers on the walls like you see in hospital areas, right? And quite honestly, the floors are disgusting in those places. And so it's unsurprising to me to start hearing about these cases starting to come up. What's really shocking to me, though, is, I don't think anybody in my practice area with prisons believes that only a few inmates have been, affected. I think a lot of people have been affected in prisons, and they're just not, just like the rest of the state. This is my opinion. Doesn't affect you, Robert. I'm not stating anything for you. But
I'll tell you if I agree, which I probably do.
If there's not testing, then we don't know what's happening. And it's easy to say, we don't have a problem if people aren't being tested. And so So the facilities they have for those who may be, infected are inadequate. The facilities, the social distancing capacity is inadequate. And it's just not going to be shocking to me if we find out that a significant number of inmates are affected. Now, what that means for my practice area, I've talked to other attorneys that work in this area, and we are concerned. We've talked to prison advocates, prison reform advocates, and we're watching the news every day. And we know that some inmates have died, from some where coronavirus has contributed. And we have to assess those cases. I've never been called by anybody, but we would assess them and try to figure out what could be done, what needed to be done. And then we would look to see if there's qualified immunity for the state in terms of pandemic being prepared for the pandemics.
Yeah, yeah, and it sounds like that, that's going to be a big issue across the country, because I know that people in prison are dying from this. There's been a couple in Arizona for sure that I've seen, and
Yep.
and there's many other places. Arizona is not as bad in terms of our prison system as a lot of the other places. I know many of them, federal prisons. I think I reported on it that it's like 70% of the inmates tested at federal prisons had the antibodies or had it. And in my opinion, it's just a matter of time until we see that same situation unfolding in Arizona, at which point, of course, we will have more deaths in our prisons. And it's something I've been repeating, ad nauseum on the show, but people don't go into those. Most of those people are not in there on a life sentence. They're there for
Right.
2 years, for 6 months, for 5 years, 10 years, but not a death sentence. And we as a society have an obligation to make sure we're upholding our end of the contract that we enter with these people when they go in, and for us to fail to do that is a massive dereliction of duty, which I think undermines the entire foundation of the justice system. So,
Totally agree. Yeah.
That's that's my tirade for the minute. But so, my kind of last thing I wanted to ask you about is specifically, how do you identify cases that you want to work with or that are ripe for action? Because this is something that I get a lot of. I'm sure you do too. When you say you do criminal law, when you say you do civil rights in particular, I get people all the time send me messages on Facebooks. I get handwritten letters from people who are in custody. And unfortunately, we don't do anything in civil law. We just don't. We want to be good at criminal law. We do, rules of evidence, rules of criminal procedure, the federal statutes, Arizona, that's it. We leave the civil stuff and, family law and tax law and all that stuff to the lawyers who are good at that. But we get a lot of questions from people who are saying, take my case, help me, let's appeal this.
Right.
This is a civil rights claim. Help me, please, please, please. And, a lot of what we get is there's nothing we can do. The appeals deadlines have passed, and, there's no new evidence, and they're unhappy with how their prior attorney was. But, a quick review of the case doesn't show any sort of, misconduct or anything like that. So as a person in your position who, specifically can work on civil rights claims, you've got experience and expertise in that. What's that process look like? Or how, of course you're in it for the right reasons. You want to help people, but you can't help everybody. And, there's some difficulty there. So how do you work through that?
Well, I mean, I think, like, as every case is different, and you need to assess them all separately. But the high level of that is, I want to get to know what your real background or why you're calling. I'm calling because I have this problem. Put it back in the medical context for a second from a prison, because that's an area that I practice a lot in. So, someone will say, I've got this, slam dunk case. That's usually the letter I get. It opens up with, I got a slam dunk case and I just need you to sign on and we're going to make millions.
Yep. Make millions and be famous. And you can write a book about it at the end of it. That's all the time. Yeah.
Okay. So I get those too. And so, we look past that. I think the first thing we do at our practice is I'll have one of the associates or one of the clerks go look up what they did. And that's only because I want to get an idea of, is this a career? Is this a liar, right? Is he doing financial crimes, doing lies, fraud, that type of thing? Or,
sure,
was it something different, just a possession of drugs or something? That gives me an idea who we're talking about. Then my reaction to them, if we get letters from the jail or prison, is I write them back and say, hey, look, thank you. And will you please send me a timeline of your events and your, any documents you have? health needs request forms, grievances you may have done, timelines you may have written. Send me a copy of all of those things and we'll look at it. And then if we're interested, we'll write you a letter and we'll set up a time to talk. And we're always going to be aware of the time frame for the 180-day deadline, the notice of claims, as well as the 2-year statute of limitations for civil rights cases in general. And we'll watch those and advise those folks on that. And then the rest of the time, once we determine if it's something that's realistic, if someone says, oh, this is a good one I got. It said, oh, my rights are being violated. They won't stop the people from smoking 10 feet from the door to my barrack, to my jail cell. And there's nothing we can do. There's no real damage. It might be as a violation, but there's nothing to it. So we got to size all those up. If it's a good medical case or something interesting, our firm may or may not make an investment with an expert, or a doctor at least, to review what we got, order some records and take a look. And then we'll get real serious with them then. Whether, figure out a plan. Usually it's to file a lawsuit, but there might be something else we do to help them.
Yeah. And you touched on it, I think, sort of the idea of damages, right? What is really the damage? Because a lot of the people want, people get damaged all the time by the police. I'm not denying that. I'm not saying, most of our clients are damaged by the police in some way. They get bruised, they get scraped, they get, twisted elbows or sprained wrists or something during the arrest, during, the whole thing. Mm-hmm. And it's not a comfortable thing. You lose a lot of dignity when you're thrown in a cell and put hand behind your back and all of that stuff. But what you're looking for is sort of just a practical matter, right? Is what is the amount of harm that was caused? Did you lose a limb? Did you, right. Is your arm not going to work the same? Was your house exploded by, a SWAT team?
Right.
Those are the types of things that, that you can correct me if I'm wrong, but those are the types of things that will make it fruitful for, as you said, you've got investments that you need to do, hire experts and invest your time and your office's time. And so you need to identify cases that are a little heavier on the damages, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, it's a business, and like I agree with you that people's rights might be violated regularly, or they might be damaged by the police regularly. But if it isn't something that's, permanent or objective, right? Like you're looking at a broken bone, like I mentioned, the broken bone cases, you can look at that on an x-ray and know right away. A professional can show that to a jury and say, oh yeah, this is a broken bone. And, we can establish that it occurred at the jail or at the prison and it wasn't treated. And here's the effect of it not being treated. And here's the pain that's a result of it. That's what we're looking for. Something quantifiable, objective, and there's a lot of times where I have to, tell people, you got an interesting case. It sounds like there's some liability here, but, in terms of the size of the case, it doesn't look like it's going to be anything more, we had one that came to our office the other day and there was, $1,200 in medical bills. It was a pretty interesting looking police, case where the police, 5 officers took down a 76-year-old man, right? Seemed pretty brutal. But at the end of the day, he presented no objective, like broken bones, no concussions, no nothing like that. It was just $1,200 in an ER bill to be told he was okay. And that's a case where I think he might have a case, but something that doesn't make sense financially for our firm to do, unfortunately.
Yeah, it is unfortunate. And there's a lot of that goes on. I mean, I certainly don't want to get into this to kind of dissuade people from reaching out to an attorney. That's not what I'm getting at all. But just so people's expectations are realistic. We get those letters all the time. Yeah, man, the cops, they scraped my knee and I'm going to get $1 million from the city of Scottsdale. And it's like, no, you're not. We can help you through this and help you understand how this works, but you're just not going to. Right. And I think there's a little bit of a disconnect there. People see if you're hurt in a wreck, get a check, and they see all this money and this compensation and stuff. And so, the idea can just get a little bit skewed. And so I just wanted to kind of take a minute to correct that a little bit.
Yeah. It has to be for especially to engage our firm on a civil rights type of claim. And we are looking for something substantial. We don't want to go into court and say that, he had a scrape on his knee and they put a Band-Aid on it. But, that was really, a terrible event in his life. And how are you going to substantiate that? Our judges at the district court here, I think they'd laugh. I think they would probably laugh at me.
They would, they absolutely would. Yeah, they absolutely would. And I actually agree with them. I agree. There are certain
Me too.
levels of, yeah, I do agree with that. I mean, if there are serious damages, but we have to have that hard conversation with people a lot too. It's like, look, I know this happened to you. I'm sorry. It sucks. Police are, in your situation, really did a poor job of handling this well, but it doesn't make sense for you to file a notice of claim or to do anything with that. So unfortunately, that happens a lot. I wanted to ask, okay, so we talked a lot about qualified immunity and some of the civil rights claims. Tell me just a little bit more about your firm, right? I understand you also do just general personal injury claims as well. Tell us
Sure.
where you're located. You guys still open? Still accepting cases for the foreseeable future, and where can people find you?
Sure. So I work at the law firm of Mills and Woods, and we handle all manners of personal injury. We do car accident cases. We do wrongful death. We do medical malpractice work regularly. While COVID-19 is going on, we mostly work from home, just as following Governor Ducey's stay-at-home protocols. We're going to continue to work from home on an as-needed basis, come into the office as needed as well. We are taking on new cases. I'm regularly handing out my cell phone number to folks so they can call and we can review stuff and also, doing emails. But I have met with the clients in person it's so weird, but across from a conference table and,
Yeah.
talking with them about their particular facts and cases are always kind of difficult, but we're ready to do it. This slowdown has actually been good for our office, not because, we don't work like you do, Robert, maybe where, you got to get all the, we don't have hourly clients. So we're able to really continue to press on with our work on the cases that we're doing. And so things have slowed down a little bit, and it's been nice to be able to catch up with that work, close off, finish settlements for clients and things. So
Yeah, I agree with that. The kind of the pace is allowing us to sort of remember why we got into this in a certain way, right? It's allowing us to kind of have these conversations and think a little bit harder about the people who are in custody, the people who are on the bad end of the government deal that surrounding a situation they were in. So some of the pause has been good, and we can really kind of connect with our roots. I've enjoyed that.
Yeah, our office. You had asked where we were.
Yeah.
We're at 12th Street in Camelback, so we're right off the 51 in Camelback. It's a small little office. We have a dedicated staff, and during this time, I think a lot of folks are doing it too. But we'll do everything as electronic as we can. We can do all digital signatures and get something out to you, for signatures and retainer agreements and stuff right away. But we do make personal appearances at folks' house to hand settlement checks over. We wear masks and things like that so that
Good.
we're following the guidelines. It's definitely been different, but we're still open for business.
Awesome. Well, awesome. Well, how about a phone number or website address so people can actually log on and connect with you?
Sure. So today the best website is millsandwoods.com, all spelled out. And my email address is scott@millsandwoods.com.
Awesome. All right, my friend. Well, Scott, listen, I really appreciate you hopping on here and telling us about this. We spend a lot of time in criminal land, and so it's nice to talk to somebody from civil land because it is important. A lot of what we see, people sort of forget about that component. We were talking about Ahmaud Amari, and he was killed, and of course, somebody's life is not, there's no compensation for that, but certainly his family's going to have claims. People are going to have claims against all sorts of different entities and agencies from around the country. And it's important that they know how to access those and pursue those. So I appreciate you coming on and educating us a little bit about that.
I've always, like I said, I've enjoyed watching your series, Watching the Watchers and Bad Popo. And this one, when I saw these facts of our case and these other cases lined up, and I look forward to the opportunity to chat. And if you want to do it again some other time, I'd love to do it. Yeah,
absolutely we will, because like I said, I don't know much about it, about the qualified immunity and all that civil stuff. We pass that off to guys like you, and I appreciate you watching. I appreciate you coming on. It's been great talking with you. And so connect with Scott. It's scott@millsandwoods.com, or just check out the website, millsandwoods.com. Scott Griffith, thanks so much for coming on, my friend.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I appreciate it. Have a good day.
You too.